Our mission is this: we are a community of spiritual seekers inspired to promote a just and compassionate world. Today we welcome to our pulpit Reverend Emily Boggis, whose sermon will be presented by our own Marie Laberge. Today's musician is Pat Field, who will now offer our gathering music.
Thank you, Pat. Our call to worship is from Reverend Scott Taylor, Within This Work of Renewal. Mindful of the precious promise of a new day, we gather again to recommit ourselves to the task of mending, of tying together those tender strands that connect each to each other, the world, and those parts of ourselves buried deep. Within this work of renewal, hope lies in wait. So come, friends, let us begin.
We light this symbol of our faith that as we respond individually to events around us, we intend our individual acts to combine toward building a positive and flourishing community.
Our reading was selected by Reverend Boggis from an essay called A Slower Urgency, written by Bayo Akomolafe, an author, a speaker, a teacher who was born on the African continent and now lives in India. Here is an excerpt. I learned a long time ago about a particular saying from the continent I grew up on. The times are urgent. Let us slow down. The first time I heard this African saying, I knew I had happened upon something important, something that needed to be shared at this time when the theme of urgency and prospects of an apocalypse scenario, World War III, climate change disaster, Trump, are now familiar tropes in our conversations about the future. So, everywhere I was invited to speak, I offered an invitation to slow down, which seemed like the wrong thing to say when there's a fire on the mountain. But here's the point. In hurrying up all the time, we often lose sight of the abundance of resources that might help us meet today's most challenging crises. We rush through into the same patterns we're used to. Of course, there isn't a single way to respond to a crisis. There's no universally correct way. However, the call to slow down works to bring us face to face with the invisible, the hidden, the unremarked, the yet to be resolved. Sometimes what is the appropriate thing to do is not the effective thing to do. Slowing down is about lingering in the places we are not used to, seeking out new questions, becoming accountable to more than what rests on the surface, seeking roots. Slowing down is taking care of ghosts, hugging monsters, sharing silence, embracing the weird. If a humanist response to, say, the killing of the whales or police violence urges us to do more and more to stop these phenomena, the call to slow down reminds us that we do not simply act upon the world as if the world were external to our actions or if we were external to it. We are the world in its ongoing actioning. As a result, we might come to examine our complicity in class issues and how the loss of immediate connections with the wild renders us moderns poor spokespersons for the well-being of the non-human. The world is a going together, a becoming together. This has vast implications for how we think about ourselves, others, and the world. Perhaps today's new openings in thought and action afford us an opportunity to build sanctuaries, not sanctions. Sanctuaries. Places where people can feel safe and held, where a composting of ourselves can take place. I haven't spoken this long today, so you have to give my voice time to get back to itself. So before I share with you Reverend Boggis' sermon, Rest is Resistance, I should give you a little background. As you may know, I am the worship chair. And when we have a gap in the schedule, I often look for alternative sources for service material. In the past, we've shared videos from a Sermon of the Month series that we subscribe to, and we have shared services that UUA ministers offer each month through the Soul Matters material. So you're probably familiar with the Soul Matters material because that's what we use for our chalice circles. But in addition to the chalice circle material, there's also a packet for worship materials. And it includes within it services that UUA ministers have gifted to folks on the theme of the service. This particular service comes from the June Soul Matters packet on renewal. I selected it a couple weeks ago when I knew this was 4th of July weekend, hot, steamy. Rest seemed like a great theme. We're starting in the summer. Little did I know that the couple weeks between selecting it and today would be what I described to the worship team as a between the presidential debate and the Supreme Court decisions and all those things that we are grappling with in the world around us. I think this service is even more appropriate given the last couple of weeks. When we share the service offered through Soul Matters, I contact the minister and ask permission, if it's still okay that we can share it, even though they gave us permission already. And Reverend Boggis said, of course. She also asked that we consider, in the place of an honorarium, a contribution to BLUU, Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. And the worship team has done so. Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism is an independent organization that seeks to expand the power and capacity of Black Unitarian Universalists within our faith, providing them support, information, and resources, and doing justice-making and liberation through our faith. Reverend Boggis was a co-minister at Beacon Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Summit, New Jersey for 18 years. She graduated from Meadville Lombard Theological School and previously worked as an AmeriCorps visitor volunteer at Habitat for Humanity. This is her sermon. These are her words. Reverend Boggis' word. Every day after school, the son of a well-known rabbi would enter his house, place his backpack on the dining room table, leave the house through the back door, and head into the woods behind the house. At first, the rabbi gave little thought to his son's ritual, until it continued for days, and then weeks. Every day, out into the woods for almost a half an hour, the rabbi grew concerned. My son, he asked one day, I noticed that every day you leave the house to spend time in the woods. Are you okay? Oh, Papa, the son replied, there's no need to worry. I go into the woods to pray. It's in the woods that I can talk to God. Oh, said the rabbi, clearly relieved. But you should know that God is the same everywhere. Yes, Papa, said the boy. I know that God is the same everywhere, but I am not. Can I get an amen? Do you know what amen means? The word itself has been traced back to an ancient Egyptian word, ament, and it translates to ground of being. When we respond with an amen to something we've heard, it expresses that what we have heard is connected to a truth or experience we have known, like the earth supporting us. You always have a choice to say amen or not. Throughout this morning service, giving you a heads up, I will ask you today, can I get an amen? If what I say resonates with you, if it connects with you, then by all means say amen. And if not, God, you guys are eager. If not, that's okay too. It would be a very boring world if we all agreed with everything everyone said. So, returning to our story about the rabbi and his son. The son teaches his father a lesson. God may be the same everywhere, but we are not. There is such a thing as sacred space and sacred time. When we enter it, it opens us to the divinity within and the divinity without. It helps us to find our center. It may be available to us in all spaces and in all times, but some spaces, sometimes, don't work for us because we are not the same everywhere. I wonder, how many of us live our lives like the boy, entering our homes, putting down our work, and going to our sacred spaces? How many of us, after a long day, release our burdens and make time to find our center, our sense of what is holy? Anyone? It's not something I do. Probably not too many. We enter our homes and there's a never-ending amount of work to do. Someone recently shared with me, almost in a whisper, I missed the slowness of time in that first year of the pandemic. Is that wrong? It feels like we're going at breakneck speed. I've said it once, and I'll say it again. The wisdom of Peter Drucker, the famous management consultant. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Even with the best of intentions to live a slower pace of life, America's dominant culture takes pride in its fast-paced urgency. The culture ate our intention for breakfast. My grandmother has a framed cross-stitch on her wall that reads, "To rest is to rust. We can sleep when we're dead." Welcome to grind culture, says Tricia Hershey. She's a performance artist, activist, a theologian, and a daydreamer. She calls herself the Nap Bishop, and her ministry, you guessed it, is the Nap Ministry. Now let me warn you, it isn't just about naps. It's not about self-care. Glennon Doyle rightly commented that calling Tricia Hershey's ministry a nap ministry is like calling Jesus' work a walking ministry. When people enter Tricia's nap retreats, they are often surprised. They think they've come to nap so that they can return to the grind culture well-rested. What people aren't expecting, Tricia says, is that she's calling you to resist the grind culture. Full stop. She not only hands you a blanket, she also hands you a metaphorical flamethrower so you can burn the culture to the ground. Amen. Rest is, in fact, resistance, and she is calling on all of us to join together and resist. The times are urgent, says Bayo Akomolafe. Let us slow down. Imagine a world where naps are essential to human flourishing. Can I get an amen? Amen. The Nap Bishop says, rest is a form of resistance because it disrupts and pushes back against capitalism and white supremacy. Both of these toxic systems refuse to see the inherent divinity of human beings, not to mention the planet, and have used human bodies, especially black and brown bodies, as a tool for production, evil, and violence for centuries. Grind cultures make us all human machines, willing and ready to donate our lives to a capital system that thrives on placing profit over people. Have any of you heard the news about cargo ships steaming right through whale habitats and feeding grounds and major pathways? Whales are like the endangered blue whales living off the southern tip of Sri Lanka. They strike and kill the whales repeatedly. An organization called Whale Safe has been asking large cargo ships to slow down to 10 knots when traveling through whale territory since 2014. Whale Safe uses buoys that listen for and identify the songs of blue whales, fin whales, and humpbacks, which alert shipping vessels who are near the whales, urging them to slow down or reroute. In 2019, before the system's launch in Santa Barbara, 46% of vessels slowed down in voluntary speed reduction zones. With the new system, the percentage has risen to 60% in 2022. Another organization called Protecting Blue Whales and Blue Skies actually pays shipping companies to slow down for the whales. The times are urgent. Let us slow down. Imagine a world where we are paid to slow down. Can I get an amen? Amen. The rest is resistance movement, says Nat Bishop. I thought that was her name all of a sudden. I was having a little brain freeze there. The rest is resistant movement is a connection and a path back to our true nature. We are stripped down to who we really are and were before the terrorism of capitalism and white supremacy. That's when we learn we are enough. That's when we reclaim our divinity. God may be everywhere, but it's nearly impossible to find our center in grind culture. The rabbi's son goes to the woods to find his center because the dominant culture stops him from experiencing his divinity everywhere. Yes, his trip to the woods is an act of centering. It is also one of resistance, says Tricia Hershey. On Sunday, our junior high class gathered to watch a Twilight Zone episode. You may be surprised that 12 and 13-year-olds will actually watch black and white TV. They will. I think it's mostly due to our amazing snacks. The Twilight episode is called The Obsolete Man. It's set in a future, not the one that will be, but the one that could be, as Rod Serling tells us. We enter a scene where a man is put on trial for being obsolete, no longer productive, no longer worthy. You see, in the future, the state has banned books, and the man is a librarian. Therefore, the man is now obsolete. If found guilty of being obsolete, the librarian will be put to death because he now has no value. In his youth, he had been a carpenter. Producing furniture is valuable to the state. If he'd remained a carpenter, he would not be obsolete. But the librarian chooses to resist. His method of resistance? Reading. At the end of the show, the host, Rod Serling, does something unexpected. He reappears on the show to give the moral, saying, any state, any entity, any ideology that fails to recognize the worth, the dignity, the rights of man, that state is obsolete. You might recognize those words as they are our first principle. We, Unitarian Universalists, affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of each human being. Rod Serling was a member of the Santa Monica congregation, and he wrote that episode in 1961, the same year that Unitarian Universalists voted to create and live by our principles. Tricia Hershey calls on us to view grind culture through a similar lens. This dominant culture, grounded in capitalism and white supremacy, does not recognize the worth and dignity neither of human beings or our planet. Any state, any corporation, any religion, any entity, warned Sterling, that fails to recognize the worth and dignity of life is heading for a future in which it is obsolete. The times are urgent. Let us slow down. Imagine a world in which you are worthy just for being alive. You are valued. Can I get an amen? Amen. How many of us are exhausted? How many of us are facing an even more exhausting week? How ironic that we lived with a deadly virus for 3 years that attempted us to teach us to take that exhaustion seriously. We didn't listen because culture eats strategy for breakfast. In the last 2 weeks, 2 of my teenagers had a virus, just a common winter virus. As my eldest got ready for school, she shared me her symptoms: sore throat, aches, fatigue, no fever. We tested her for COVID, negative. I said, I think you should stay home. Her response is, I can't, I've got too much work to do. I countered, if you had COVID, you would be home for 5 days, period. Let me ask you, if you didn't have a lot of work to do, would you stay home? Her body deflated as she confessed, yes, gladly, I feel awful. She ended up staying home and slept for 6 straight hours. I texted her from work, I guess it's good you didn't go to school. She replied, yeah, tell that to my math homework. We aren't allowed to be sick because the work never stops. The pace is unrelenting. If we don't do the work, we don't catch up. It requires someone else, our coworkers, our partners, to add more work to workloads that are already unsustainable. Grind culture, says the Nap bishop, keeps us exhausted, and we're addicted to it. If I told you that your practice for the next week is to get 8 hours minimum sleep per night, as I have done with folks, you wouldn't believe the resistance I hear. I couldn't do that, they cry. I wouldn't get it all done. That's the point. Keeping us exhausted is intentional, because if we're exhausted, we won't have the ability to dream of new possibilities for ourselves and our planet. It keeps us in a state of despair. One of the tenets of Hershey's nap ministry is that naps are portals to our imagination. The seeds of our future exist in our imagination. When we nap, we're connected to dream space. Grind culture steals from us the spaces of dreams and imagination and future. But remember, oppression was imagined. Liberation can be imagined too. It requires us to take our imaginations back. Sorry, I skipped 2 more pages. It will require us to slow down. It will require us to rest. Let's begin right now. Sit in your chair with your back upright, your feet firmly planted. For those of you at home, recline in a chair, a bed, couch, in a hammock. A hammock sounds so good. Scan your body and recognize any tension. Breathe deep. Imagine a world without limits. Imagine a world without oppression. Imagine a world of liberation. Imagine a world where whales swim free without risk of harm. Inhale deeply from your own belly. Hold for 4 seconds. And then exhale slowly. Open your eyes and repeat this several times a day. Lady Nancy Ambrose was the grandmother, of the prophetic mystic Howard Thurman. She was born a slave. As a little girl, the white preacher would come to the plantation and offer service to her community. He was allowed to do this. Years later, she told her grandson about a moment that changed her life forever. The preacher looked at her and her community in the eye and said, "If you remember one thing, and only one thing, I want you to remember this. You are not slaves. You are children of God." For the rest of her life, Lady Nancy Ambrose held this truth inside her. It was her center. No one could take it from her. Her grandson, Thurman, went on to meet Mahatma Gandhi, the guru of nonviolent resistance. Gandhi taught Thurman to resist small acts of evil. Don't begin with the big evil of the world. Start small. Resist small acts of evil and work your way up to the bigger ones. Thurman returned home to the United States, and his small act of resistance was to teach folks, especially Americans with their backs against the wall, the marginalized, people of color, the poor, to teach folks how to establish a sense of inherent worth and to live from a place of dignity. Thurman was following in the footsteps of his grandmother. If the dignity of a person can be restored, if a person can claim their worth, he said, it stabilizes the ego, increases self-esteem, and gives one the courage to question oppression. How did he teach folks to do this? He taught them how to sit in silence, not unlike a nap. It seems like such a small act, and it is, but the writer Maggie Smith reminds us to remember geological time, how the slightest shifts, imperceptible daily, carve canyons and make mountains. We have to trust that our small acts of resistance are making progress, even if we can't see it yet. The times are urgent. Let us slow down. Imagine living from your center every day. Imagine claiming your worth every day. Imagine your dignity restored. Can I get an amen? Amen. Because if we do that, no one can take it from us. Rest is resistance, beloved. I've decided to follow in my grandmother's footsteps. I've learned how to cross-stitch. It's a gift to my future grandchildren. One day I will frame it and give it to them. It will say, "To rest is to resist." This is the ground of our being. Amen.
Now we will extinguish our chalice. Please join in reading aloud the chalice extinguishing. The words are in your order of service and on the screen, we hope. Hey. We extinguish the flame of our chalice, but not the light of understanding, the warmth of this community, or the fire of commitment, which we hold in our hearts to share with the world every day until we're together again.
Our closing words are from the poem by Martha Postlewaite called The Clearing. Create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there until the song that is your life falls in your cupped hands. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worth of rescue.